Geek Shop. I'm Chetan. With me is Chris, Ken, and Derek.
Hey,
Hello.
So we went back in time last few episodes.
Yeah.
Golden Age, Silver Age, and what comes next?
Bronze Age.
Bronze Age.
Bronze Age.
To me, probably the most confusing age of them all. Like when it
Really?
started and particularly when it ended, I'm not really sure.
Because it's a short period of time.
Well,
Yeah.
85 is the Bronze Age concludes, they say in 85, but
85, okay.
yeah,
85,
that's
really.
yeah.
So would you say Bronze Age? Okay, we're going to look backwards or forward or whatever. We should be starting when Bronze Age started, but Bronze Age ended, let's say, when DC decided to do their whole revamp.
That'd be
You mean
1985.
Crisis?
Yeah,
I would think so, yeah.
isn't that around 1985 or so?
Yeah, about that time.
Yeah, 85, 86,
Okay,
probably by the time I was said and done. Yeah, that tracks.
I guess
So
they're calling
basically the
that.
Bronze Age is when all the comic book companies were at their most confusing time.
Yes, yes.
You think confusing? Why would you think that?
Well, just the idea that they had like these multi-universes of like, I was actually watching a thing recently about Superboy, and they were sort of talking about the timeline of Superboy, and they were saying it got kind of confusing because Superboy originally was supposed to be Superman when he was younger, but then
Yeah,
eventually they had trouble telling stories and connecting the dots both on both sides, both on the Superboy story side and on the Superman story side. And so it just got confusing. So that's when they sort of said, well, what if this is just a different world and it doesn't have to connect? And then Crisis was basically the answer of like, well, we have all these worlds and it's so confusing and people don't know what's going on. And so we're going to just smush them all together and eliminate a bunch of stuff. So it's sort of like if 85 is sort of the end of it, that's when Crisis happened at least. That's when sort of DC at least was like in this like what there's so too much going on. We have to like destroy things to make it work.
okay. Before we go crazy on this, let's go backwards. When did the Bronze Age start?
1970, dude.
1970. So
Yeah.
what would be the key essential book that came out in the 70s that would start off the Bronze Age?
Superman and Batman, the two books, the two main well, Batman first, I believe, would be the first.
So would you say like Batman, the Denny O'Neil Batmans and Neil Adams?
Yeah. Denny O'Neil would be one.
And Superman, I
Englehart
think
would be the next on Detective for sure.
Superman, if you're saying that, that's Carrie Bates still writing it. And
No, dude.
oh
No,
no,
no.
that's earlier than that. Sorry, earlier than that.
You're talking the 1971 storyline with Denny
Yes.
O'Neil and Kurt Swan, where
Right.
they did a kind of soft reboot at that time for Nine
Yes.
Nations. Do you remember
I
that story?
Yes, yes.
Like the Kryptonite engine, and then that kind of sand version of Superman, and it got really crazy for like 9 issues.
It's funny. I don't that's a little before my time, but I just saw one of my YouTube channels that I subscribe to covered exactly that era of Superman. I just
Oh,
watched on
cool.
my lunch
Oh,
break.
Nice. Yeah, it's like 233 to 242. Though I have all those issues.
okay.
If you remember, the iconic cover to 233 is the Superman breaking the chains
Yeah, yeah, the
that
Neil Adams
Adams
cover.
did. That
Yeah,
was the start of it. That
yeah.
was Denny O'Neil's kind of take on, I guess, a soft reboot to update Superman for the time. But those are good issues.
The funny thing is, I don't remember. I remember reading those issues, but I don't remember as being, like oh, that's a new version of Superman. No.
It was meant to be at the time.
Okay. Now
But it was very
For Marvel, would you say and this is going back to our episode about Jerry Conway. So, the Spider-Man stuff that was going on, the Clone Saga and all that stuff, would you say that and Punisher and all that stuff, is that the Bronze Age for Marvel?
Part of it, I would think. What do you guys think?
yeah.
X-Men, I
I,
think, was starting to really come on its own in the 70s as well. Like,
70s,
Wasn't it a bit later though, Chris?
hmm?
Wasn't it a little bit later though with X-Men? Or I'm not up on my X-Men more, so I don't know. But
Yeah. I mean, it's not like that it was like, what it became like with Chris Claremont, but I think it's sort of, I think they were getting away from the idea of them being just cute teenagers that were going
Yeah.
out and fighting
yeah.
battles and a little bit more episodic and a little bit more sort of, a little. It seems like grittier. Like even when you talk about the Batman and Superman stuff, it seemed like the beginning of the Bronze Age was sort of almost going anti-Batman, the live action, the Batman '67 stuff, and almost saying how do comics answer this? And then it's you're not quite Dark Knight gritty, but you're getting grittier for sure.
Yeah. I'd probably say like that X-Men, giant size X-Men 175, but I'd say that it's the Jerry Conway Spider-Man stuff. If I had to put it, I'd probably say the death of Gwen Stacy. If I had to,
That's it. Yes, yes,
put
yes.
if I had to.
Yeah, and that goes back to being gritty.
Yeah.
Way
You kill off a character, that's as gritty as you get. So maybe that makes sense. Sort of, their answer to sort of getting away from, the Spider-Man cartoon series and stuff like that. It's like, well, how can we go a different direction? And killing off Gwen Stacy is a great way because they would never do that in an animated series or in sort of a lighter sort of costumed character. I guess Electric Company was at that time too. So Spider-Man was
I remember those.
On
Yeah,
Electric Company, yes.
they're fun.
Now,
so
what we left off on the last episode was to be continued episode was we talked about how Batman TV show affected comics.
it seems like there was a rebellion a little bit.
From what Ken said, yes, it seemed like it because comics really didn't go along with the same what do you call it, quirky, stupid humor of the TV show.
Well, technically, doesn't that end the Silver Age when you think about Batman TV show is kind of on the later end of the Silver Age, I would think, before we go into the Bronze Age?
Yeah, actually, you're right.
Yeah,
You're right.
That could be a
You're
good
right.
bookend. Yeah.
I would think.
But it's surprising that at that time, I can't remember who owned DC, but it wasn't Warner Brothers at that time. I think it was in the '70s, in the Bronze Age. I think it was Warner Brothers. But my thing is, the company, head honchos at DC didn't say, "Hey, Batman TV show is very popular. Let's make all our Batman comics similar to what the TV show is like."
I feel like that's something that happens in the modern age. The
Yeah,
idea
it
of
does, it does.
synergizing.
But I'm surprised in the '60s they didn't do that.
I don't. Well, I think they focused more on toys and merchandise than they did specifically on the comics. Because if you think about it, like in the Batman, like if you look at the Batman TV series and you look at the sort of old retro toys, there's billions of them. Like there's so much that exists.
But here's the thing, which I'm baffled by, especially from the Bronze Age. I mean, for a Batman TV show is, let's say that ended. With the comics, I'm surprised they didn't do any photo covers of Adam West or Burt Ward or any of the villains on the comic covers. Because remember, even DC had Don Rickles on Superman covers and Jimmy Olsen covers, photo covers and things like that. So I'm surprised they didn't take advantage of the TV show sales to say, you know what, let's put Adam West on the cover.
I don't know. I'm not too sure about that though. Why would they? I just don't see it. But
yeah. I feel like the writers and then the artists just had different ideas in mind. And
it seemed like it because the comics were nowhere near what the TV show was like.
No.
And I think you're sort of thinking from the brains of like modern day, which is where there really is a synergy. And I hate to use that word.
No, but
there's this connection.
Right?
Yeah. No, but even in the '70s, they had photo covers because, some of the DC stuff, some of the Marvel stuff had photo covers. And I was like, again, you're right. It is the modern age, but I'm surprised, some editor-in-chief at DC didn't say, "Hey, let's tie this stuff in."
I don't know if this is the case, but it's totally possible that at the time DC was its own company and the company making the TV show. Because I know with the Superman thing, because I just watched a documentary, Viacom ran a bunch of the Superman stuff, and then Warner Brothers took it over. But there was more about like licensing it. So they would basically say, "Hey, you're going to buy this character," and it's different studios. So they're like, "You do whatever you want. You pay our money. You can license our character." And the comic books were just its own thing. Nowadays, because like DC is owned by Warner Brothers and it's the same company.
Now you can license it like crazy and all. Yeah.
There's no licensing. It's the same company. It's not even. It's so once somebody comes up with something in these companies, it's like this is our strategy for toys like if you look at like the structure of these companies, it's like you have like Warner Brothers, then you have like their toy division, their comic division, but everything comes off of this. So the idea comes here and it gets fed to all these other ideas, and that's how they have to do it. And that's, again, we'll talk about it in the modern era, because that's, I think, one of the traits of the modern era is corporations buying them. But I think then it was like there's a completely separate company, and they're just like, you do whatever you want.
That makes sense. Now, one thing I remember talking to a buddy of mine years and years ago about the 70s in comics, and I think DC-wise, Carmen Infantino was the president of the company or head honcho there. And I remember one of the things that he mentioned that DC was doing was, and this is where, you know, it's bad for comics. It was that because of distribution, DC wanted to, be better than Marvel. So they would print more comics so that they could have more newsstand space.
Makes sense.
To push out the other guy. And that's why you see a lot of books that came out that only lasted 4 or 5 issues or maybe less. And 70s was early 70s, late mid 70s was, they did a lot of that.
I also imagine comic book shops were starting to come.
I was going to mention that also. Yeah, that was the boom of the comic shops.
Well, keep in mind, guys, though, with the Bronze Age, it was also at DC, it was the start of long storytelling. Like if you go back to Saga of the Demon and Detective, it ran for 11 issues from like 1970 to 72. So they were the first company to really start doing the long format storytelling at that time.
Yeah.
And even the Superman that kicked off that era, if I remember, was like a 9-part
story. 9 issues. Yeah.
Yes.
I guess they also, with the advent of comic book shops and everything, you could start to get more older readers. Like you weren't just, it wasn't, I think this was a bit of a time when comic books went from kids to maybe adults. And so the idea that you could hold an adult's attention, particularly
I think they started leaning more towards that also. During the late 70s, they started doing more, like, come on. I mean, they had Man-Thing, Howard the Duck, and all that stuff where it was, beyond, kids read it, but the humor and stuff, Steve Gerber, what he wrote was more adult oriented.
Master of Kung Fu, all those books.
Yeah. It was definitely, I will often say though, I believe that the 1970s and maybe even to the 80s run of Spider-Man was probably some of the best stuff.
I agree.
Read, like so much fun to read. That stuff was great.
Even Ken will agree with me on this one. Even Captain America was great at that time.
Oh, I love Cap. I own the entire
70s
run.
Cap. I remember I used to buy like crazy, even issues and stuff, and they made him more grittier, more patriotic, grittier, and it just he didn't take any crap type of a person.
No. Well, you think what they did with that book, right? They created the Falcon. He showed up in the series.
Was that Roger Stern writing it?
Roger had a good run. I think later on though, after Kirby, like in the early 80s.
Yeah.
Remember, he turned Steve into like this advertising artist, or he was working for an ad agency and stuff like that, and they made him really grounded. He was living in New York. He had like Jewish friends that he knew from the past. He had a girlfriend that he was involved with. So I could see that. I could see why you liked it.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. Captain, mind you, I didn't read X-Men at that time. X-Men,
I didn't either. Yeah.
I think X-Men I got on when not even John Byrne. I think it was when Paul Smith came on. That's when I started getting onto X-Men. Then John Romita's run. Then I went back and looked at the John Byrne X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think they were introducing a lot of characters in X-Men at that time. Like, and particularly some of the wackier ones out there. Even like Dazzler, I think came out around that time. And just like I said, just some of the sort of they sort of leaned into the 70s disco look and really sort of the costumes and the characters really sort of turned into that.
Now,
X-Men for sure.
Yeah. Now, one thing I have to say, now you guys could let me know on this one. Was it late 60s or 70s when Charlton came out? Because they were huge for a while.
Late 60s.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
That was that Ditko era.
Yeah, Ditko era.
The Question.
Yeah, Question, Peacemaker, and all those stuff.
Captain
So
Adam.
Captain
Yeah.
Atom and all that, and they were huge for a while.
Yeah,
Same
I
thing
think
with
that
what
was it goes
Batman.
big sayonara to Marvel at that point. Just
Yeah,
he left Spider-Man and then went to Charlton to
yeah.
um, get all those characters out.
I guess that would be late Silver Age then.
I would
Late
think
Silver.
so. Yeah.
Late Silver Age, early Bronze Age, I
Yeah.
assume. Okay. And I
Yeah.
remember 70, was it 70s also Atlas Comics was around?
Yeah, they started in the early 70s, like
Yeah.
71, 72, somewhere around there.
I remember buying few of to this day I don't remember some of the comics they produced. I just remember buying a few of them because you'd see them on the rack and it's like, okay, try it, but I can't recall any of their titles.
But Atlas Comics, they were notorious for like 1, 2, 3 issue. A series would start and then it would be
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
None of those series had any long-lasting impact.
Yeah. Although it sounds like a lot of this has to do, again, going back to the idea of comic shops and maybe bigger distribution for comic books in the 60s or in the late 60s, 70s, and then into the 80s. Like, I definitely think the 80s was a prime time. Like, I would see comic books in the 80s when I was a kid everywhere, like the drugstore, the
Yeah.
grocery store, there'd be comic shops, there'd be, like 7-Elevens, like, and it was everywhere. So I think,
Everywhere. And
I think,
the 3-pack, 5-packs comics you could buy at Walmart and grocery stores. Oh, I bought them like crazy because, okay, you saw the cover. Oh, and Ken and I joked about this years ago. Always used to be a Defenders comic in there, but
Yeah, that's
for
true.
me, but for me, it was like, the reason I bought it was Kevin Nolan did the cover on Defenders. A lot of those covers in it. That's what made me buy it.
I'll be honest, what made me buy it was the fact that I could go to a shopping with my mom and I could buy a comic or I could buy 3 or 4 comics.
Yeah.
And so I would be like, well, of course I'll take 3 or 4 comics over one comic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the
mentioning
spinner rack was great way back
spinner
then.
rack, yeah, that's another thing.
Great.
That's a big thing during the 70s.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember going into like grocery stores when I was like 5 or 6. Like I just go into the store and there was a
70s and
spinner rack
late
full of comics.
70s and early 80s, spinner rack was the huge thing for comics. And what Chris said, I remember going, I don't remember if it was 7-Eleven or a convenience store. It's like, going there once a week to see what new stuff came in.
Yeah.
And I remember I used to ask the owner or clerk, when does comics come in?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember what day they said, but they said, shipment came in whatever time, twice a week or something, and you scheduled going there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm coughing because I'm getting over a cold. So the one thing is now this is going to be the sad part of comics now is at the end of the Bronze Age is the downfall of comics because now comics are going from retail stores, 3-pack stores to comic shops now.
But there was a boom though, Chetan. I don't know if it's a downfall.
No,
Do you think it's a downfall?
it was a boom for a while, but
Right.
it took away a lot of new readers because, you had the collectors and stuff going to comic shops, but like Chris said, you go in with your mom or dad to, the drugstore, you see the books on the rack or you see the 3-packs, your parents would say, okay, buy it. Your parents are not going to take you to a comic shop, especially in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah. The thing about like comic book distribution, from what I remember, and I don't know how many people here have worked at a comic book shop, but for a while there was this idea that they would overprint so much and they would end up destroying so much of their comic books. Because I remember when you had cheap comic books, you used to rip off the covers.
Yeah, because they used to the story I read was they ripped off the covers and they would return the covers for whatever credit or whatever it is, So yes, they would I guess they would overprint because, and I guess it would be hard to judge exactly how much they sold. Where comic shops, here's the problem with the comic shop is, and this is where I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing is. Let's say Brian from Worlds Collide orders Spider-Man #1, 50 copies. To to Marvel, they sold those 50 copies. It's an end deal. Where distribution, you don't know how many you sold until those covers come back.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so in a
And
way,
there was a different market for stores than there was for comic book shops, like different distributors and different rules. So
yeah.
stores could return things a little bit easier and didn't care that much either. Like if a comic festered on a shelf, they were like, whatever. And they would get money back depending on what
But
didn't sell.
do you find
So
it? But do you find it with large what do you call it, mass distribution to supermarkets, grocery stores, everywhere? Kids had more access to comics.
sure, yeah. But I think the shelf space was more valuable to stores for other things, and that's why eventually
That's
comic books
another thing.
disappeared.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, so. But I think the comic book thing is a bit of a boom. I mean, to me, it seemed like a boom because, like, to me, it created a better community. Because when I was searching the stores when I was a kid, like the drug stores, I was sort of by myself, or maybe like occasionally you'd see somebody else going through it. But when you go to a comic book shop, buying comics is like I mean, for better or for worse, I don't know. Some people had better experiences, some had worse. But for me, when I went to like Silver Snail for the first time in Toronto when I was a kid, it was like, oh, there's other people like me, and there's a
Oh
bit
no,
more of
no,
a
no. I
community.
think comic shops was a great experience. It was a great experience, but I think with sales and stuff like that, I think it might have affected sales for comics for a while because, again, the four of us here will go in and buy, Derek will buy his Savage Garden, Ken will buy whatever, Captain America, you'll buy yours, I'll buy mine. That's it, you'll buy. Where, I think in grocery stores and stuff, a 10-year-old comes in with his mom. Hey, that's a Superman cover. Superman's in this.
Yeah.
Can I buy this? You know.
Or
So
even like me, where it's just random. I'd be like, I don't
that's
care.
what I
It's a
mean.
pack of
Yeah,
comics.
that's what I
Yeah.
mean, and that's where I don't know if it was a good thing or bad. Okay, I understand the shelf space, but I wonder how the overall sales for the companies were at that time.
Yeah.
Hard
We're
to
good
say.
enough to last 15 years, 15, 20 years, but not good
Yeah.
enough to keep it going. I think the resale market too is a thing that changed in the 70s and 80s more so. The idea of comics being collectibles, because if you even look at the value of old comic books, they went up heavily in that time. Older comics became more valuable because of comic book shops, because there was this and conventions. There was more of this idea of like, well, people wanted to collect full runs. People
Yes.
wanted to, there was more of this specificity on like really collecting a
But
certain character, a certain,
that goes back to what Derek and Ken mentioned. DC and Marvel was starting to do extended stories. So now the person who bought X-Men number 175 or whatever had to buy the previous issues to technically understand the full story. Where before you go to a corner shop, buy your latest X-Men, read it, you come back 4 months later, read the next one. Where you didn't
yeah,
have to, we're not, and I think the Bronze Age started the continuity thing.
Yeah, at DC it did.
Yeah.
yeah,
Definitely at DC. Marvel did too, but I think DC was the company that really started it because you had Wonder Woman. They started the change, like following the women's movement.
Yes.
Batman got more grittier. The stories in Detective with Steve
No, but they
Englehart.
started doing more extended stories. That's what I'm
Yeah, that's
saying.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's where it started. I think Marvel did it too, but I kind of remember DC being much better at it
Yeah.
at that time.
But that,
Yeah.
I
Well, I
think that
mean,
was,
Crisis is an answer to that, right?
yeah.
Crisis is them extending stories that continue, but then they're getting too confusing, so they have to smush it all down to something a little easier to consume.
Oh, I was a huge DC fan in the late 70s and early 80s. And even as a DC fan, I was confused on a lot of that stuff because it was just like, and it's one of those things I remember reading where, I had seen one of the Crisis books saying they want to narrow the universe down and all that stuff. Reason being is if they go, the problem is you get one bad writer and they're going to ruin everything for you, because
Mhm.
they're going to introduce certain things that later on does not make sense and stuff like that. And that's what happened with DC. They just, come on. For a while, what DC, especially like Superman, it got ridiculous for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
True.
wondering if maybe the answer to the Bronze Age afterwards, the idea where they had writers like Chris Claremont who would be on a title for like forever. And part of that was the answer to these problems of stories where you get a writer coming in for one issue that just suddenly screws up the entire continuity. And so I wonder if maybe the comic book companies sort of post Bronze Age were sort of like, okay, we have to start having more streamlined storytelling.
I think in that situation, I think they went with the TV shows approach where, soap operas work and, have extended storylines conclude, to be continued at the end, and keep the reader, enticing to buying the next couple of issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Marvel,
unfortunately,
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, you're talking about extended stories. Like, if you remember in the early 80s, Marvel would create a new book, put a writer on it, and like 2 issues later, there's someone else writing it. It was they did that a lot. I've noticed that. I'm not so much of a DC, but Marvel did that all the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, there was this idea, I think, in Marvel that it was like, well, I mean, we all know that they didn't really take care of their talent. They're notorious for that. They have a reputation for that. We can look at Jack Kirby as the prime example, but like guys who were creating their stuff, I don't think they really understood the value until later on, until maybe the modern age, of having, a good writer or maybe even a good editor that's taking care of the entire series, that's giving it a streamlined approach. And I kind of liked that about Spider-Man, because I like the fact that things would change up all the time. And I like just, Spider-Mans were easy to consume that way. But when they did attempt to do these long stories, it was sort of like, it's not working. And a lot of it was, you would be 3 issues in and it would be somebody new.
But Spider-Man, they did try later in the late 70s. They did try extending the storylines and stuff like that, like the Harry Osborn stories and all that stuff. And it just, it a little bit started becoming soap opera after a while.
Yeah.
Oh,
and Marvel was kind of obsessed with weddings in the 70s and 80s, weren't they? Like, it was like suddenly everybody had to be married.
That's true.
Derek, you're going to say something?
No, I was just kind of agreeing that, about the 70s, maybe even the 80s too. Just everyone was like, there was a real mad on to get people married at that point. But I wonder too, because Marvel didn't do a reboot, a lot of the writing into that, like transitioning from, say, Silver Age to Bronze Age, was Marvel kind of being self-aware that these characters were not aging in real time, but like started aging and then just getting a little more cynical, a little more adult.
So that leads on to our next age, modern age, because that's where characters got married, characters got mullets, costume changes, and everything. So I think this is a good way to lead off to our next episode.
Excellent.
Yeah, sounds good to me.